Good morning. Today is October 8th, 2025, and it's 8:21 a.m. U.S. Central Time. My name is Rinaldo J. Aguiar Marcano, and I'm recording this video from my home located at the 26714 Valleyside Drive, Katy, Texas, 77494. And it's important to state that I am a political refugee, recognized political refugee, and my refugee number is M as in Mike, A as in Apple, 39176, and that number was assigned to me by Canada's Immigration and Refugee Board for claims of political persecution made by the Venezuelan government, Diosdado Cabello, and all of them. So today I have a few updates, right? Well, these are not updates. Some of them are updates, but the most important ones are notes, okay? I have a note about the federal court. I have a note about a potential signal for detection of members of the ACME law firm. And some other things more local, right? Those observations. So I'll start by talking about the federal court because that's more, it's like the bigger scale of things at this point until now. That may change, but until now, that's the higher battleground, I would say. So federal court, right? So because I've realized during the process of the lower state court that the scheduler is a key component on this, let's call it technology, right, that they have. Now I'm on the watch for moves that the scheduler might make, not only on that court, but in other courts, right? So remember today being October 8th, 2025, there was a hearing, or not a hearing, but like a meeting, a conference it's called initial conference in federal court. And this was scheduled maybe 3 or 4 months ago, okay? Actually, it was scheduled originally for August 27th, and then it was rescheduled for October 8th, today, right? And this was in the calendar of the court until 5 days ago, because I check every day or every 2 days, right? The observation, and this is not an accusation, it's just an observation, right, is that initial conference disappeared from the calendar. Right? I imagine the calendar is controlled by the scheduler of that court. It disappeared, right? I noticed just 2 days ago that it disappeared. So, I waited until yesterday to see if it would reappear. It did not reappear in the calendar. So yesterday I called the clerk, and the conversation is recorded. Texas is a one-party consent for recordings, right? So it's completely legal if you call somebody to record the conversation, even if they don't know. As long as one party knows that the conversation is being recorded, that party being me, the recording is legal and admissible in court and everything, right? The thing that is illegal is recording a conversation where none of the parties of the conversation know that the conversation is being recorded. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why it is important for the network to have people close to the target that are part of the network, right? Because even if it comes down to that, right? If it comes down to, say, Francisco Castillo, for example, right? My friend from, I've known him for 40 years. But if it comes down to a legal issue, he could say, well, I knew the conversation was recorded, right? And he was a party of the conversation, then therefore the conversation is admissible, right, in court. So it's a way for them to be able to weaponize the illegal recordings, right? Because one of the parties of the conversation was part of the conversation, was an agent of the criminal network, but was also part of the conversation, right? But anyhow, to not change the topic, I called the clerk and I verified, I checked with the clerk if the hearing was scheduled or not, because I thought, well, maybe it's just a trick, right? In the calendar, they removed it from somebody removed it from the calendar, so I would miss the hearing, right? Or the conference. And therefore, the case might be dismissed or closed, right? Because I didn't show up. So I called the clerk yesterday. The conversation is recorded. I'll post the recording. The clerk confirmed yesterday that the conference was canceled, actually. The clerk not only said that it was not in the calendar, she said that it was actually canceled, right? To which I inquired, well, but can you tell me the reason why of the cancellation? Because nobody really told me, right? I'm just finding out this because I checked the calendar. And she said, well, it's within the discretion of the judge that is going to conduct the conference, whether to have it or not. It's an unilateral decision. And it was canceled. Right? She didn't really say the judge canceled it, but she said it was canceled, and she said that it was within the discretion of the judge to cancel it, right? Implying that it was the judge, but she didn't really say it was the judge. And I pressed the issue, like I wanted her to say the judge canceled because I want to know, right, who canceled it. I want to know who is the party accountable, right, in case it's a manipulation. But she didn't say the judge canceled it. She kept repeating the same phrase, right? It is canceled, and two different phrases, right, in two different sentences. She would say in one sentence, the conference is canceled, and in another sentence, consistently, she would say, it's within the discretion of the judge to cancel it. But she never said the phrase, the judge canceled it, right? So, okay, but it's canceled, right? And I asked if it would be rescheduled. She said, I have no information. You have to keep checking, and if it's rescheduled, it's rescheduled. I also asked about other motions that I've submitted, which I would think time sensitive, right? One motion was to get access to the e-filing system of the court so I can file documents without having to go in person, because it's very time consuming, right? It kills 3 hours of my day to go and come back. And it exposes me to risks like, they installing sensors in the ABS system of the SUV, right? Which they did one of the times that I went to that court. But she told me that all your motions are still waiting. There's no response on any of your motions. And at this point, I think I have like 3 or 4 motions in the federal court waiting waiting for a ruling, right? Some of them are administrative, like a change of address, and this important one, which is to get access to the filing system, right? This sounds like a basic thing. Like, if you are participating in a procedure and you are acting pro se, you should have a possibility to file documents electronically, right? So that seems time sensitive. And the other one that is time sensitive is a temporary restraining order emergency motion I filed, asking for the federal court to intervene and prevent the lower state court from violating my constitutional rights, my parental rights and other rights, right? And that seemed to me like an urgent motion, right? It's also waiting, right? It's just sitting there. Also important, another observation, I asked the clarification question about who is really the judge, right? Because originally I saw this judge with the last name Bennett, who was the judge that had the initial conference scheduled for today. But then when I filed the emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against the lower court, the clerk told me that the judge was another judge with the last name Hanks, and the name is something Junior. Right? It says Junior in the name. I can't recall the first name, but the Justice Hanks Jr., right? So I asked the question, and she said, well, there's 2 judges here, and I don't know if this is a standard procedure in federal court or is it just in this case, right? But she said there's one magistrate, I think she called him, that is going to or was going to have the conference that is now canceled and out of the calendar. And that was Justice Bennett. And there's another judge, which is the judge that has the case, which is Judge Hanks Jr. So apparently there's these 2 judges, right? I have to research more to understand what is the, what is the setup, right? So that's the status right now, and I want to timestamp this comment in case it was a trick of the scheduler, right? Because it's possible. I'm seeing that the scheduler is a key piece on this technology, right? So in case it happens later than the hearing was scheduled and I did not, quote unquote, show up, right? There is some record that I made more than reasonable efforts to show up, but they told me that it was canceled. Okay. I'm just trying to preemptively kill that, if that's the thing, right? Or at least, create a record that this is what happened. And I'm going to post, when I post this video, I'm going to post along with it the link to the conversation with the clerk and the screenshot. In fact, let me show you live right here, right? So nobody can say that. You know that the screenshot is not verifiable or anything. Yes. Right. So this is the calendar of the court, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this live so you can see, right? So I'm going to reset it. So it's going to give the calendar for today for all judges, right? And then I'm going to filter by my case number, which is 4:25-CV-02276. Aguiar B. Mosque, Iral. Click on that, and it will restrict only to that, and you see, right? There's no records, nothing today, right? And I'm doing this live. And I'm also going to change it, and I'm going to look for the next month, right? So I think you can look up to a month in the future. Sorry. Yeah, so from 10/8 to 11/8, right? So I'm going to set it to that. And of course, it's going to give me, probably more than 1,000 items, right? Because there's like 12 justices in that court. And I'm looking for a month, right? Actually, that's a good question. How much they get? Yeah, 424, right? So these 12 judges, create. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay, so I'm going to now filter by my case again, right? So I'm looking forward a month and filtering by my case, and you see there's nothing in there, right? So right now the status is today there's nothing in the calendar and there's nothing in the next 30 days as of today. So I just want to put that on the record. Now I'm going to go back to our meeting. Okay. Yes, so that's about the federal court. The other observation I have, right, is that, remember, in the lower state court last week, right, October 3rd, we had a hearing, supposedly sign the orders, right? The judge would sign the orders. And the judge wasn't there, right? And we had this hearing today on the 8th on the federal court. And now, next Friday, because the judge wasn't there, the lower court judge wasn't working last Friday when we had the hearing to sign the orders, right? And on the other side, on the federal side, we had that thing today. Now, because the judge in the lower court wasn't there last week, that was rescheduled to this Friday, to the 10th, right? So we have that coming up on the 10th. And now this judge somebody removed this from that calendar, right? I cannot say the judge because the clerk did not say the judge. She said it is within his power to do it, but she didn't really say the judge did it, right? So I'm not going to say that the judge did it, but somebody did it, right? Somebody removed it from the calendar. And now we have this other thing on Friday again, right? So you see, I mean, and this is just an observation. I'm not accusing anybody, but from my perspective, from the user's perspective, I'm the user of these systems, right? From the user's perspective, it feels like these two courts are waiting to see what the other one decides. It feels that way, like each court keeps canceling, and then there's another thing the next week or sometime in the future on the other court, right? And the first court does not reschedule until after the other court would make a decision, right? I don't know. It has happened a few times already. I mean, I'm just citing what is happening in the last 3 weeks, but this has happened before as well, right? It feels like a waiting game. Like the two courts are waiting, right, to see what happens on the other one. And I don't know if this is a thing on legal circles because I'm not a lawyer, right? I'm just a small guy trying to survive their attacks, right? Using technology. But I don't know what are the customs and what are I would say the tradecraft, right? In these circles, right? I imagine they have, it's like everything, like in engineering, right? I can tell you about my craft, right? My tradecraft. In engineering, we have certain tricks, right? That are not written anywhere, but we have tricks. We have things that everybody knows that they work, right? Like, I don't know, to give you an example, right? When you want to do a code review at Google, it's a formal process and it has rules. But there are unwritten rules, right? There are things that everybody knows that if you do them, you can get your code, pushed faster. Or doesn't mean that you're breaking the rules, but you are working with the system in a way, right? Or working the system in a way. So I don't know, right? I don't know if this would be a tradecraft of law professionals, of seeing what happens in the other court to get an idea of your own situation, right? Of the landscape on that you're moving on this case, right? So it could be. The problem is, of course, that the user is being harmed in the process, right? Because then at this point, the child is kidnapped by legal means, and my parental rights have been served without any reason, right? Any legal or logical reason. And that is not my opinion. That is the opinion of the court-recommended expert. He said it makes no logical sense to take any action until that question is addressed. I'm talking about David Perwin, right? He said that on the mediation. So, well, on the pre-mediation meeting, right? No, that wasn't a mediation. So anyhow, that's about the federal court. So I'll see what's, and the other thing, right? I mentioned in now that we're talking about legal topics, right? I mentioned in one of the demos recently that if they didn't return the child, I would escalate, right? Legally speaking, right? I will escalate the fight, and obviously I have all the ammunition in the world to escalate it, right? So I'm going to say this. I'm going to do some research, because the way I see it, right? I'm not a lawyer. I'll have to run my system to see what it comes back with, right? But the way it feels to me, the situation is, right, the lower court committed, with Morgan Heibner, right, committed a series of abuses procedurally and constitutional abuses, right? And the way it looks to me is that in the appellate court, I am looking for relief against the procedural violations, right? But the violation to due process specifically. But and this is my intuition, I don't know, I have to check this using my system, and I will check it. But it feels to me like there's been other types of violations in the lower court, specifically constitutional violations, like serving my parental rights without any justification. And it feels to me like that would be an issue for the Supreme Court, not for the appellate court. So I'm going to look into whether I can file this, a legal instrument with the Supreme Court. And I'm going to, if I can, I will do it. And I will attach everything that I have into that, if they don't return the child. Okay. So that's about the federal court. Now, yesterday I did a demo in which I talked about the TTP of the ACME law of filing important documents right at the deadline, in the worst case for them, or if they can, 10 hours before the hearing, just so the target doesn't have a way to reply. Because if the target replies, then they will object to the response saying, or objects, right? They will say in court, they didn't give me proper notice. And I've noticed that the two hearings of September 8th and September 11th were scheduled 2 days apart, which by definition makes it mathematically impossible for me to object to anything, because there's not even 3 days in between the two hearings. Right? How can I object if there's only 2 days? Whatever I say, Morgan Heibner will say, you didn't give me proper notice, right? And the judge will say, I agree. Sustain is the magic word, right? So, I was thinking about that, and on this I have to say, right, like, and I've mentioned this before, like, this is a planet scale operation that they have, right? And if you think about it, really, it is nothing else but an industrialized approach to committing crimes, right? It's an industrial operation. They do this at a scale. And, like as everything in life, it has trade-offs. Because they're doing it at a scale, it means that they have to have these things highly standardized. It's like, when you go to McDonald's, right? You go to McDonald's and you buy a Big Mac. Every Big Mac, it's the same, right? I mean, there could be slight variations, right? Slight, but it's highly standardized, and it is that way. Well, of course, like as a customer, you will say, well, I'm guaranteed that I will get the same Big Mac here or in Paris, and that is true. I mean, it's a small benefit, right? But the real gain is for the chain because it's highly standardized. They can do several things, right? First, they can switch the operators, right? They can switch the people that are assembling the hamburger, and the hamburger will taste the same, right? It doesn't affect the quality of the product. Also, they can make it super fast because it's super highly standardized. Then they can compartmentalize the production process, right? And make it fast. Optimize for the speed, right, of deployment of the burger. And also, it gives them a tremendous leverage and negotiation power with the providers of all the ingredients of the hamburger, right? Because then all the hamburgers will take exactly the same quantity of ingredients, right? And the exact same ingredients in the same order. And they can foresee, right, what they are going to need and procure it in advance. Right? So you see, all these qualities, the exact same qualities that apply to the production process of the McDonald's burgers, apply to the production process of the commission of these legal crimes, right? I mean, when I say legal crimes, I mean crimes using the legal system to be committed, right? Like kidnapping a child using the legal system, what Morgan Heibner is doing. So, if you think of that, right, it gives a lot of power to the network, but also is a weakness, right? That's the flip side of that. Why? Well, because it leaves a footprint, the same as the McDonald's burgers, right? Like, if you think about the McDonald's burgers, you see the pickles, you see the ingredients, right? You see how long it takes to assemble. If you were doing, for example, a forensic investigation on the accounting of McDonald's, for example, right? If you wanted to do analysis on the purchases of ingredients, right? You could figure out exactly, you could work backwards the recipe, right? Or if you have, imagine that the problem was the opposite, right? If you have the recipe, if you have the recipe and a geographical area, you could foresee who they're going to buy the ingredients from, right? So it gives tremendous power to anybody who wants to reverse engineer or figure out what they did. Or I'm talking about McDonald's in this hypothetical example, right? But the same thing I'm saying applies to the ACME law. The reason I say that is because, well, this observation of the two hearings being scheduled 2 days apart, that leaves a footprint, right? That it's on the record, not only in my case, but on every single case where they may have done the same thing, right? So if I was an investigative agency, I'm not, right? I'm just offering this as a tip, as a thought that could help other people in my situation, right? Because the goal, I think, should be to free everybody, right? To free all the prisoners that they have captive in this way. So one way of detecting this, I mean, the Morgan Heibners of the world, the other Morgan Heibners, right? Well, look for cases, at least in Texas, right? I'm going to start by Texas because I know that it's 3 days, right? But in other jurisdictions, it might be 7 days, it might be 10 days, I don't know, right? But in Texas, what you'll have to do is look for cases, right? In the lower courts, I would start with the family court because obviously it's a tremendous vector of attack. You can kidnap the son of a target and he can't do anything, right? There's no defense for this. He can go to the police because the police will say, well, go to the court, right? Which is what Officer Bell told me and Officer Gloria told me. They all told me, go to the court, of course, right? Because they know, right? So what you have to do is look for cases, and I would start with the family courts, in which 2 hearings in the same case were assigned with less than 3 days apart, right? With less of 3 days buffer, 3 business days. It could be more than 3 days if there is a weekend in the middle or a long weekend, right? So you have to account for that. But, having a map of the business days of the year, you can figure out which are the cases that meet this criteria, right? And then, I mean, that's just the first pass of identification. Then the second pass is look at the lawyers, right? Look at whether one of the 2 lawyers are marked, their properties, their houses or their husbands or their partners or are marked in the geo-index, and whether their law offices are marked in the geo-index. And then look at the other officers of the court to see which ones are marked in the geo-index. And then look at the scheduler and the stenographer, right, of the court, and see if they're marked in the geo-index. So it's trivial to detect this, right? And this is a consequence of the industrialization of the commission of crimes. Because they industrialized the process, as McDonald's did with the burgers. Now that leaves footprints that are obvious, right? Particularly if the geo-index is public, which it is at this point, right? And then after the family courts, I would go to the civil courts, right? And I would look for cases that are over $1 million, right? Now, as I said, this would work. This setup with the 3 days would work in Texas because it's the 3 days on the Rule 21 of on procedures. But in other jurisdictions, you'll have just to adjust to tweak this. And so make the 3 days a variable, right? Well, you have to do this by software, obviously, right? So make the 3 days a variable, and then you adjust it depending on the jurisdiction, right? And then you can detect in every single country, in every single country, even outside of the US, you can detect where they've done this, right? And this, I mean, the goal is not only to identify the perpetrators, but to identify the targets, right? Because you have to tell them that they're being targeted. Right? And then, if that happens, ask them to get into the class action lawsuit, right? Which is the long range bomb that I have, right? That's my long range weapon. So I promised that I would talk a little bit about legal strategy. I'm not, of course, give my strategy to the other team, but I'll say that the way I see it, right? I think the federal court is my will be in this conflict my long range weapon, right? Kind of those weapons that are slower to deploy, right? And have to be handled with tactical precision, but can cause damage, across the ocean. So that's important to say that. And in the lower court, I have no aspiration of getting any justice or relief. I know that, right? Like, and I've known that since April, since Morgan Heigner sent the server to serve me papers 20 minutes after I was started doing API calls to find addresses of agents of the Daro Cabello in Caracas, right? So even at that point, right, I'm talking about more than 6 months ago, it was obvious to me that in this process I would never get a fair treatment. So there's no emotional investment on my side on that process. So I'm focusing more on the other two, right? And of course, the Supreme Court, as I said, right, it's not a long-range weapon, but it could be a very powerful move. So I'm going to do more research on that, on whether I can seek relief for the constitutional aspect of the violation, right, more than the procedural on the Supreme Court. All right. So with that, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about local things, right? Observations. So on this street, Valley Side Drive, Lara Creek, and Spring Ridge, the other street, right? Very abnormal behavior on the last 4 days. The cats are suddenly coming out. Like, these are people that I never see them, right? In years. They never come out of the houses. And now they're all playing with the kids on the streets. Like, now it looks like a regular American, like the streets that you would see in the movies, right? Of an American suburb. Like, the kids are playing on the street and playing ball, and they're catching the fathers and the people in bicycles, and they're talking to each other and telling jokes and laughing. Like, you see the thing and it looks like an American movie, right? But I don't know, right? I don't know if it's that they're afraid that the FBI could drive by and see what's going on, or if they brought actors, right, to get recorded by the cameras to confuse the FBI, right? Could be one of the two. But it's a completely abnormal behavior, and I want to put it on the record that this is not the way it's been in the last 11 years, right? In the last 11 years, I've never seen a face. to the point that yesterday I was able to see the woman of the house in front, the 26711 Valleyside Drive. I've never seen that woman in 11 years, never seen her face. And I saw, like yesterday, she opened the door and she came outside, and another person came and they were telling jokes. This has never happened in 11 years. So, I mean, that might not be the woman, right? Like that might be an actress that they put in there to confuse me or the cameras or the FBI, right? So another one, in one of the demos recently, I mentioned this black large SUV that they have coming back and forth 100 times per day, right? Trying to catch the downlink of the satellite antenna. Yesterday, I was going to, of course, because of the angle, that camera is very powerful. Like you can see 200 feet away and see the license plate. It has a super powerful zoom. The camera is like this big, right? I mean, the lens, the optical lens has this, range of movement. But because of the angle, right, that car is traveling, I cannot see a license plate. So yesterday, I was going to pick up my son with my former partner, and in the corner, that SUV came driving by and intercepted us, right? Of course, I took the plate, but I want to, and I'm going to give you the plate, but I'm going to make the note that it's possible, right, that this was just one of their moves to confuse me, right, to show me another SUV that looks exactly the same, but with different plate, so I make this mistake that I'm about to make, right? I'm going to give you a plate that is not the real plate. It's possible, right? But anyhow, the plate of that vehicle that intercepted us at the corner exactly where, the exact time was Texas, T as in Tango, Sam, Whiskey, 2717, or 1727, because I didn't have something to write on. I memorized it, and I may have inverted the number. So it's possible that it was Tango, Sam, Whiskey, 2717, or Tango, Sam, Whiskey, 1727, one of the two. And it's a large black SUV. I think it's a Chevy. What else? Okay, one of the cameras picked up on the 26711 Valleyside Drive house, the Chinese safe house that they have in there. There was one of the cats that came out on Tuesday, and it was a younger cat that it hasn't been seen before, right? So I don't know. It could be a new, one of the new people that they brought in a couple of weeks ago, but that is not the regular cat. The regular cat is a man on his 40s, and this was probably in his 30s. And the hair looked different, and he was shorter. I don't know. So just another note in that. Another note, there was an incident recorded months ago with one of the landscapers that work at that place that has the water tank marker close to my home. Let me show you, just to be very specific about this. Sorry, the computer is a bit slow. No, the sharing is not